Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to take you through the concept of project baselining, what it means and what is required. My name is Oscar Mbira. I'm a certified program and project manager. My name is Oscar. Channel, don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button so that you are the first person to be notified each time a new video is uploaded on this channel. So in this section of the video, we are going to look at what is baselining in project management. So we are looking at what is baselining, what is baselining in project management. Project management. So what we are trying to understand here is the meaning of baselining a project. Most people or most project managers, they make a mistake to think that baselining, it's only for the schedule or the project plan. That is not always the case, and that is not always right. In some cases, you baseline a number of components for you to conclude that my project is now baselined. So in this video, we're going to look at these specific components that we have to baseline. So for us to understand what is project baselining, we're going to look at it from two angles, from the start and to the end. So we are going to have a line like this, okay? And then we are going to put a line like this here, this side. All right, so here, let me put the end also. Okay, so we are going to have the start date here. When you're baselining a plan, you should know the start date. And we are also going to have initial values. So I'm going to put initial values. Okay. Then we're going to have end values and also end date. So I'm going to use a different color now. So as you go through your project, most projects, they have what are called stages or phases, okay? So assuming your project is going to have, say, 3 stages or phases, a project can have as many as possible. So this one is going to be a stage. I want to call it a stage, project stage. And then you might want to call it phase, project phase. Assuming this is phase 1, okay? Then we have a stage also, or phase. I want to call this phase or stage number 2. Then you have stage or phase, which I want to call phase number 3. A project can have a number of these, but for the purposes of explaining why we need project baselining in project management, I'm going to use only these 3 stages. So there are certain parameters or components that you have to consider when you're baselining a project. So what do you mean by baselining? You want to create a reference where you can make comparisons. It could be cost, it could be budget, but you want to make a reference. So in project management terms, this process of making a reference is called project baselining. So let us look at the components. There are 10 of them which we are going to discuss here that make up a project baseline. So for us to appreciate that, I'm going to show about 4 columns. So the first one is going to be the component. Okay, the component that we are going to look at when baselining a project. So this one, I'm going to put a line here. Then after the component, we are going to have start value or baseline value. So I'm going to use the word baseline. Okay, value. Okay, then I'm also going to have what is called current or actual value. So actual or current value. We're going to populate this as we go. Then the last one is deviation. Okay, deviation value. So this is the whole concept about project baselining. So the first component we're going to look at is called scope. So number one, we're going to have scope. Okay, so scope baseline. Okay, then number two, we are going to have what is called timeline or schedule baseline. Timeline, the baseline. Okay, so most project managers, or if someone is new to project management, they only think of baselining only to consider timeline, but there are more to this. Number three, we're going to have what is called cost or budget baseline. This is a critical component of projects. So we have cost and budget. Then number four, we are going to look at what is called resource baseline or structure baseline. So we are going to say organizational structure. Okay, organizational structure baseline. Okay. After this, we are also going to look at what's called quality baseline. So you also need to put your quality baseline. It's also a very important component. Okay, number 6, we are going to look at what is called a risk baseline. You also need to baseline your risk. Okay. So let's go on. Number 7, there's something called milestone baseline. So you also need to document milestone baseline. Okay. Then number 8, we have what is called assumption baseline. So all the assumptions that you need to put them here. And then number 9, we also have what is called constraints baseline. Any constraints that we have. Constraint baseline. Okay. Then number 10 that we're going to look at is called technical baseline. Technical baseline. Okay. So let us look at this. What we are saying here is for each and every stage in a project baselining process, you have different stages in a project. You also have stage number 1, stage number 2, stage number 3, according to this example. For each and every stage, you should be able to validate these components against each and every stage. So what it means is, when you're baselining your project, you're baselining basically 10 components in general. You can put more, but for these purposes of learning here, I'm going to put 10. So for each and every component, you want to baseline, which means you want to record the reference point or initial value. I'm going to give 2 examples for these components for clarity. Say, for example, you want to baseline your project to run for 18 months, okay? So you are going to put 18 months. That's your baseline. Now, assuming the current value for the timeline is 20 months. So you now have 20 months here. What it means is you have spent more months as compared to what you had baselined or what you had referenced. So you have a deviation of minus 2 months as of today. So you have a deviation of 2 months. Okay? Another example, we are talking about budget, assuming your baseline amount or costs or budget is 2 million. Okay? And now you have spent only 1.2 million. So you have spent 1.2. So there's no deviation. Okay? So the main reason for baselining a project is to be able to record these components. Why are we recording these components? These are going to be used as a reference. So I can give you a good example. If you want to travel from your home to your city, your starting point for you to measure how many kilometers from your house to the city is your house. So as you move from your house all the way up to the city, you are able to calculate and to show that I've moved 2 kilometers, I've moved 1 kilometer, I've moved 3 kilometers. The same also applies to a project. For you to be able to measure the performance of the project, you must baseline, which means you must give some reference point, some reference data. You are able to say, now I was supposed to spend 2 million, I spent 1.2 million. The same also applies, some of these components, they might not be very specific to be numeric. I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button so that you're the first person to be notified each time a new video is uploaded on this channel. To start your project, during the initiation stage, you should be able to pick all these components and also identify how are you going to measure them, how are you going to document your components when you're baselining the project, not the project plan. So for example, I can give milestones. You might have 6 milestones when you baseline the project. So I'm going to use M for milestone and 6 for the 6 milestones. So you have 6 milestones, okay? But your actual current value, you might find as you go through the project, either due to some other reasons, your milestones are increasing. For example, you now have 8 milestones, okay? Which means you have deviated from the 6 up to 8. So you now have -2 milestones. So there are different recordings that you can take for each and every component able to make informed decision, because you have the baseline, you also have the current value. So each time there's any deviation, you are able to pick proactively the deviation and make corrections. So let's revisit again. What is baselining in project management? Baselining in project management is a process of creating references that we are going to use in future to compare the performance of the project. So in this video, we are looking at 10 components. The scope baseline, you also need to specify the baseline for the scope. Say for example, scope, you only want 2 products to be produced by the project. Okay, so in your scope, you say 2 products. This is what you expect to cover as an example. Then also on the timeline, you want to baseline the timeline. I want the project to run, or according to a business case, the project is supposed to run for 18 months. Say after 18 months, you have not managed to run the project, it has gone up to 20 months. It means you have a deviation of -2 months. So if you're a project manager, this is important. You now know that you're now ahead of what was budgeted for, or you have more than what was budgeted for. Then you need to take corrective measures, or else you have to go to the project board to get approval for the additional months or the additional budget that you're having in a project. Then the next one is on the cost or the budget. There could be so many reasons why the costs can go up. It could be additional components being brought into the project, or additional ingredients being brought into the project, or maybe there's a rework of some of the deliverables that will also increase the cost of the project. So when you baselined, it was 2 million. According to current value, it's 1.2 million. So this metric is very important for the project manager, because you are going to be able to know that how far are you from the original budget, and proactively you can even go to the project sponsor or project board to highlight that you have gone 1.2 million of the budget and the project is actually at 60% completion. So the 40%, it might not be enough for you to get for the 1.2. So as a project manager, this is very important to know, and this is very important also to track. You must have all the components that you use for baselining. Then organizational structure, again, it can be baselined, which means the organizational structure of the project, not of the company, of the project. It can be baselined. Say for example, it's a program, you want to have 2 project managers. So your structure is going to have 2 project managers. Assuming along the way, there are sub-projects that might come up that might require a dedicated project manager. So you might end up with more than what you had budgeted for. For example, you were running a project with 2 project managers. Now you want 4 project managers. So there's a deviation of -2, okay, which means you have an additional 2 as compared to the baseline of 2 project managers. For example, you might also run a project where you have 2 suppliers, okay? So you have 2 suppliers. I'm going to put SUP for supplier, and then now you need 3 suppliers. I'm going to put SUP again for supplier, which means you have a deviation of 1. So I'm just giving an example on what you can baseline in terms of these components. You can also baseline in terms of your risk. For example, You can also baseline in terms of your milestones. How many milestones are you expecting to run in your project? And also assumptions. How many assumptions and which assumptions were part of the baselining of the project? And as of today, it could be due to some regulatory changes. It could be due to some technical changes. It could be due to some other global crisis. We have seen what happened to many projects during the COVID-19 era. So those assumptions, you also need to put them there. Then you can also have constraints. Okay, you can also have constraints in the project that are baselining. For example, you might say, I've got budget constraints, technical constraints, resource constraints, human resource constraints. So all those assumptions, you put them there. And then as you go through the project from start up to the end, you start making the comparison. You can also have the technical baseline items. For example, you can talk of tools. You can have a technical to say, I'm going to baseline to use these specific tools or these specific standards, for example. You might talk of standards, technical standards. So you also baseline these items. As you move from one stage to the other, when you're running your project up to the end, you make a comparison of these values against what has been baselined. In most cases, baselined items, they are approved by either the project board or the project steering committee. If you want me to do specific video on each of these items, let me know in the comment section below. You type any of these components, and then I'll produce a video specific to that component. So this is what I wanted to cover in this section of the video. In summary, there are 10 components that we have to look into. As manager, there are certain components of project baselining that you should understand. So in this section, we are going to cover the 10 components for a project manager to understand in terms of project baselining. So 10 components. 10 components of project baselining. Project baselining. So we're going to look at these 10 components. So the first one we're going to look at is called scope. So we're going to put number 1. We're going to put scope. Okay. So what do you mean by scope? So I'm just going to put a line here. What do you mean by scope? When you talk of scope in baselining a project, we are looking at project deliverables, okay? So we are looking at project deliverables, okay? Okay. So in scope, when you're baselining a project, I'm not talking about baselining project plan, I'm talking about baselining the whole project. When you're baselining a project, you need to baseline also scope. So this is called scope baseline. Scope baseline. Let us get that clear. So scope baseline, you are baselining the project deliverables. You are also baselining any features that you're expecting to have from the project. You can also baseline the functionality that you are also expecting to have from the project. So you baseline a component called scope. Then the second one is called time. So you also need to baseline time. So we have a time or schedule baseline. Time or schedule baseline. So what do we mean by this? We are talking about start date on the schedule. We have our start date. Okay. We also have our end date. End date. So what are we talking about? We are talking of start and end date of project tasks. So when you're baselining the project based on the timelines or schedule, you need to record the start date and the end date for each and every project task or even activity. You might want to call or activity. So every project task or activity must be recorded or baselined. When you do this, you end up with what is called work breakdown structure, WBS. So this is work breakdown Let's make it clear. Breakdown structure. This is also important. Then for scope, you normally have what is called product breakdown structure. Okay. So product breakdown structure, or PBS. That is also defined when you are baselining the scope. So the third item we're going to look at, component, is cost. Some they want to call it project budget. Baseline. Okay, project budget, baseline. So what are we looking at here? We are looking at the value of material. Okay, so we have material cost. We have labor. Okay, we have material cost. We also have labor. This is also very important. Or in addition, you might have other. Can I just put other expenses? Other expenses. That is when you are baselining your cost and budget. You look at other expenses, materials, labor. There could be a number of items you want to put here, but for clarity, I'm just going to leave it at 3. Then number 4, we also have another component called quality baseline. So we have quality baseline. Quality baseline. So what is expected here on quality baseline? We are looking at any quality standards. Okay? Any quality standards that you want to baseline in the project. Okay, you talk about them. And then you can also look at acceptance criteria. This is for the deliverables. Criteria. These are products or deliverables in the project. These are also covered under quality. Then the 5th one that we want to look at is risk. So here we are going to have number 5, risk baseline. Okay, what is expected on the risk baseline? So we are looking at items like potential risk, potential risks. You need to baseline them, and also you look at the impact or the likelihood. Okay, so this is probability of happening, probability, or the impact of the risk in case it materializes. So let's recap these 5 before we move on to the last 5. So when you're baselining your projects, you need to make sure that you have also baselined your scope, you have also baselined your deliverables, your product breakdown structure, your features, and also the functionality. Then when it comes to time also, you also need to baseline the timelines or the schedule or the project plan. Okay? So this one can also be a project plan. Schedule or project plan. So you also need to baseline that in terms of the start date, the end date, and also the work breakdown structure. That is very, very important. So you put the start date, end date for all the tasks and the activities that you are going to perform in the project. Then we have the 3rd one, which is cost or budget baseline. What are we looking at here? You can talk about material cost. You need to baseline them in your project. You might talk about labor cost. You also need to baseline them in a project. We are talking about other expenses that might come, okay, that you might need to baseline. For example, you might have a cost in terms of licenses for any software, for example, or hardware, additional hardware. Those are other costs. So in terms of other costs that you predict to be part of the project in future, you also need to baseline them. You are creating a reference, okay? Then we have the quality baseline. Quality baseline, we are looking at the quality standards that you expect in the project. You baseline them so that you create a reference. As you go through the project, you are able to refer that in terms of the standards of quality that you expect in the project, this is what we have agreed. For example, you might say you don't expect a product to last less than 1 year as your quality standards. So this is one of the items you need to test to make sure that your product is able to go beyond 1 year. Then acceptance criteria. This is very important. Most project managers, from my experience, they forget about the acceptance criteria, especially of deliverables or products from the project. So that has to be defined early and also baselined so that you are able to make a comparison in future. This fifth one we are looking at is risk baseline. You also need to baseline your risks in the project so that you are able to make a comparison in terms of the potential risks that you had earlier and the current risks that you have in the project, and also the probability of the risk to happen or to occur. You also need to baseline that so that you make a comparison in future, and also the impact of the risk. It requires a baseline too. I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you're So let's continue with the last 5 components of project baselining. So I'm going to put continue. Number 6 that we're going to look at is called organizational structure baseline. Okay. Organizational structure baseline. Here we are talking of the project structure, not the company structure. So this is project structure. Okay. So what are we looking at this point? We are looking at, for example, roles. Okay. You need to baseline the roles and responsibilities. The roles and responsibility, and also the team members. You need to baseline, which means you're making a reference to the expected team members in the project. Then the next one is governance structure. Okay. Governance structure. You also need to baseline this. For example, you want to say project board, part of the governance, project board. You can also want to say project directorship. So there are a number of components that you have to do. Project directorship. Okay. So you need also to baseline your organization or the structure of the project. Then number 6, we are looking at technical. 7, sorry. Number 7, technical baseline. Okay. On technical baseline, what are we looking at here? We are looking at standards, for example, technical standards. We are looking at technical standards. Okay. Or even tools. We are looking at technical tools that we are using. You also need to baseline the tools that you are using so that we are able to make a comparison in future. Then the next one we are looking at is technical specifications also. Technical specification of what the project is going to produce or deliverables. You need to be able to baseline this so that you make a comparison in future. Then number 8, we have what is called assumptions baseline. Assumptions baseline. So what is expected here? There are a lot of assumptions that you make when you are planning your project or when you're just initiating your project. So we're going to look at these examples. For example, you look at maybe there was a regulatory assumption, or for example, market conditions. You assumed something on market conditions, okay? Or you assumed something on certain constraints, okay? Certain constraints, you make you make some assumptions over there. Okay. Then number 9, we are looking at milestone assumptions. We are looking at milestone baseline, not assumptions. Milestone baseline. You also need to baseline your milestones so that it's very clear to everyone on what exactly you're talking about. So, in baselining your milestones, you have your start date and also your end date in your milestones. Each milestone must have a start and end date and the status of the milestone. What to expect the status? It could be work in progress, it could be finished or semi-completed. This is very important. Each milestone must be baselined. You should be able to do that. Then number 10, we are looking at constraint baseline. Constraint baseline. What do we mean by this and what is expected? So there are certain constraints that you work with when you're baselining your project. Number 1, it could be cost constraint or budget. Okay. It could be human resources as a constraint, or it could be technical constraints. Technical constraints. So like what we did with the previous 5, let us summarize or recap on the last 5 that we have. So organizational structure must be baselined for the project. So let me put it project organizational structure. You should always baseline this so that you're able to compare in future what you originally had in mind or what you originally planned in the project against what you now have or what is the current organizational structure of the project at the moment. So on the organizational structure, you are looking at roles and responsibilities. We are also looking at team members. In your structure, you want to be able to compare the original team members you had or team roles that you have. Do you still have the same? So your reference is your baseline. Then the other one is governance. On the governance side, you want to see how the project is going to be run. It could be you had project board, maybe you don't need project board anymore, or you had a project director, you don't need the project director anymore, or on top of the project director, you now have a program manager. So once you're able to baseline this, you're able to progress, you're able to make also reference in future. There could be technical baseline. Technical baseline, you're looking at technical standards that you might baseline. Even tools, you're looking at tools that you can baseline and make a comparison in the future. Probably you want to start with 2 tools, then after about 10 months, you now have 10 of them. So at least you have a comparison to your baseline to say, initially I had 2, now I am now having 10, so you have a deviation of 8. Then technical specifications of the deliverables or the products of the project, you also need to baseline them. Most people, they make a mistake of not baselining on the technical side. They focus only on the timeline. And as a project manager, you should look at a bigger picture than only the project plan for baselining and the costs. Then the 8th item is assumption baseline. When you are creating any project or when you are planning any project or when you are documenting any project, there are certain assumptions that are inherent in your plans, in your documentation, in your discussions. So that has to be also baselined so that in future, if there's any change of those specific assumptions, you are able to make a reference that I had 6 assumptions, but now I have 10. What causes these assumptions to change? There could be some regulatory rule that has been changed. So we can put a regulatory rule that has been changed. So it means your assumption might not be valid anymore. It could be market conditions, they might change also, and your assumption is no longer valid. Or you want to compare the current market conditions against the previous one. Since you have baselined them, at least you have a reference. Then also, you might have certain constraints that you assumed, but now things have changed. Then you can compare with your baseline. We have also milestone baseline. Milestone baseline is you want to compare the original milestone numbers that you expected, or even descriptions that you expected, and the current or existing milestones, so that you're able to make a reference and compare in the future. So you're looking at the start date of the milestone and also the end date, and also the status of the milestone. Is it work in progress? Is it something that is finished? Is it something that is semi-finished? And so on and so forth. Then the last one, but not the least, is constraint baseline. When you're baselining any project, make sure all the constraints are also documented when you start the project, so that you are able to make a comparison in future. So we have costs, budget, we also human structures, also human resources, and also we have the technical constraints. So these are the last 10 items that we looked into. If you want to learn more about what is project baseline, I'm going to leave a link where you can also watch the video on what is project baselining for your knowledge. If you want me to create specific videos on how these baselines are actually created, updated, and also monitored, let me know in the comment section below by typing any of these baselines, and then I'll create. In this section, we are going to look at the benefits of project baselining. So we are going to say benefits of project baseline. Okay. So the first benefit we are going to look at is improvement on the project control and visibility. So number one, improved control and visibility. So what do we mean by this? So through baselining of the project, you now have a clear reference. Okay? You now have a clear reference point. What do we mean by this? So baselining is nothing more than just creating a reference point which you can make a comparison in future. So now, after you've done your baselining, you now have a clear reference to make comparison in future. The second one is you can have early identification of deviations. So what do you mean by deviation? So early identification of deviation. Then the second one we are going to look at is also on the proactive risk management. So increased risk management. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? It means you have proactive risk management. What do you mean by this? So once you have managed to baseline your project, you are now able to pick any risks that might happen in future. Number three, we are looking at facilitated decision making. So number three, facilitated decision making. So once you're able to baseline your project, you make it easy for informed decision making. So we are talking of easy, informed decision making in the project. So once you have baselined your project, where it becomes very easy, informed decision. Number two, also, you can also make data-driven decision. Because your project is now baselined, you now have the initial data to make a comparison. So in future, you have a data-driven a decision based on what was baselined earlier and also what is the current status. Okay. I hope you're enjoying the video so far. Number 4, we are looking at increased project predictability. Project predictability. So you have baselined most of the components. When you're baselining your project, you are now able to predict outcomes. For example, you want to be able to predict how the cost structure is going to change, how the resources are going to change, or even the project structure is going to change. So this is also very, very important. And you're also able to maintain reduced risk of failure on the project. You're now able to predict all these things. If you see something going the wrong way, you're able to pick and also reduce the risk of failure. And also you're able to confirm and reaffirm the critical path components. Critical path components. Some they want to call them activities, critical path activities, or even deliverables. This means the same thing. It depends on the type of the project that you are running. So the critical path is nothing other than the activities or components or deliverables that should not be delayed. CF 5, we are going to discuss the benefits on communication and collaboration. So we are also talking of increased communication and collaboration is a benefit to baselining a project plan. So what do we mean by this? We are talking of baselining. In most cases, it must be well documented. So we have documentation of any baselined items, and also stakeholder or management of stakeholder expectations. Management of stakeholder expectations. In terms of communication, it also promotes what is called transparency. Everyone is aware. If any item is baselined, the communication is done and everyone is aware of what has been communicated. These are the 5 main benefits of project baselining. Number 1, we have improved control and visibility. We have clear reference, and also we have early identification of any deviation. Then for increased risk, we can proactively do risk management as a benefit. The third benefit, in terms of decision making, we have facilitated decision making by baselining, because you're going to be able to see the data-driven approach that you can apply, and also you make informed decision because of the baseline that was done. You're able to compare what was baselined against the actuals. Number 4, we have increased product predictability. So what it means is you're able to predict some of the outcomes in the project based on the baseline details that we have, whether you're heading for failure or you're not heading for failure, and also you reduce that failure, probability of failure. Then the last one on the increased probability is the critical activities on a project. You're able to predict them, you're able to pick them, and also you're able to do proactive risk management. Then the last one but not least is increased communication. Once you've managed to baseline your project, you are going to make it easy to communicate to any of the stakeholders, and also the documentation becomes very clear because you now have a reference point. So these are the 5 main benefits of project baselining.